Rachel Lankester is the founder of Magnificent Midlife, author, podcaster, mentor, and general disruptor of the ageism stereotypes about women, particularly at work. Receiving an early menopause diagnosis at age 41 turned her life upside down. She then set on a mission to help others embrace what she believes could be the best stage of their lives. Today, she is tirelessly fighting against menopause fear-mongering and shares useful tips on how to prepare for and navigate this often messy period in our lives. She's a firm believer that older women can and should contribute to society and that employers have to keep up, or they stand to lose. What is her biggest dream? Simply to change the world, starting with perceptions of menopause.
We need to pause for menopause. The clue is in the word itself.
Yes.
And it's pausing because we need to do the work. We need to take the time to work out what's going on with our bodies. But I also want, younger women to be prepared, not scared. And I want older women, postmenopausal women, to be celebrated so that women of all ages know that life is going upwards. This is not, I don't suddenly get to this cliff at menopause and fall off it and that's the end of meaningful life. No.
Good morning, Rachel. Very, very pleased to have you on the show today. A very experienced podcaster yourself and known as Rachel Lankester from Magnificent Midlife. So do you want to tell our listeners a little bit more about Magnificent Midlife?
Hello, it's lovely to be here. Thank you very much. Oh, how long have you got? That's going to take up the whole interview.
Time.
I'll try and do the quick version. Early menopause diagnosis at 41. Very shocking because that was actually 10 years earlier than is the average age of menopause. I then went off down this very long and twisty journey because I don't like accepting anything. And I subsequently realized I think that diagnosis was probably wrong. I've learned lots and lots of things. I've learned that we can have much more agency over both our menopause experience and our midlife experience and our aging experience than we may necessarily think we have. And I wanted to convey that to other people, other women especially. And I want to celebrate older women. So my podcast is very much about celebrating older women because I think their voices are not really heard. So I wrote a book about this and I do my podcast, and I just love sharing women's stories because women have lots of interesting things to do and say. And yeah, I find them very inspiring. So I get as much out of it as I hope my listeners do, just meeting these people and talking to them. So that's kind of in a nutshell why I do what I do.
Yeah, and I think that's changed.
It's a very difficult period to define, and it's a very difficult group of people to market to because most people are in denial. Most people just they don't want to accept the old word used to be middle-aged, and I really don't like middle-aged. It does carry all sorts of negative connotations with it. But I'm very happy with midlife, and I'm very happy. I'm 57. I'm very happy to tell the world that I'm 57. And I'm very happy to say that I'm an older woman. I'm proud of being an older woman. But when does midlife kick in? Well, it really depends on how long we're going to live, doesn't it? So, the old thing used to be 70 years and 10. So that's 70. So therefore 35 is when midlife is kicking in.
By that definition, I'm midlife then.
I don't think it is. I think it keeps moving. And it also moves depending on whether you're in the UK or in the US, for example, because I have so many people pitching to be on my podcast who are in their mid-60s and even up to 70, and like my podcast called Magnificent Midlife. So they're obviously being quite optimistic there about their lifespan. But if we go with, say, optimistically 90, right? Half of that is 45. I think midlife starts to kick in around 40, and it probably goes at least to 60, actually, because I think it's a life stage. So I reckon it's those 20 years in the middle of life. That's what I'm going with. But I know, I'm creeping up to 60. Am I willing to let go of my midlife moniker? Probably, yes. I'm probably quite happy to do that. I'm, embarking on my third age or my fourth age or fifth age, whatever it might be. It's a journey. We're aging from the day we're born. But we have so many negative associations with aging. But if we didn't, then nobody would be scared of being in midlife and they wouldn't be scared of what's coming next either. So yeah, difficult to define, but you can have some fun with
Yes.
that.
Yes. Well, to be honest, I had a similar, not issue, if you will, but question when I started thinking about mid-careers, because that's a little bit different and doesn't necessarily coincide with stages in life, because obviously you weren't working for the first 20 years of your life. And you probably, hopefully, most people are hoping that probably won't be working in the last 20 years of their lives if things go to plan, or maybe they will. I think the attitudes are changing as well. But it was a similar ambition to just give women a space or a platform to talk about things that maybe are not talked about enough. And, equally when it comes to midlife, of course, men go through that. But I think it sounds like their experience is probably different. And there's something that made you a lot more drawn to talking about the midlife experience for women, isn't there?
I think aging as a general topic is so much more difficult for women. We are fed anti-aging narratives from when we are teenagers. I did a post on, I've got off TikTok now, but I did a post on TikTok early on. And I said, when did you first discover that aging was bad? And I thought, I said, well, maybe it was, in your 20s or your 30s, And somebody said they were age 5.
What?
They were age 5 and they had seen an advert for a skin cream that said it would take 5 years off their life. And they imagined themselves disappearing completely.
Well, that's what you would think when you're 5. Yeah, it makes sense.
But isn't that shocking? Isn't that shocking?
It is.
So I just thought, oh my goodness me, what are we doing to young women, especially because the boys don't get these messages. The boys, they don't have to cover up the signs of aging. They don't have to dye their hair to be taken seriously in the workplace. When the hair starts to change color, we talk about silver foxes, don't we?
It's almost a compliment, like good wine, a man ages with wine and all that. I've fit that narrative. Yeah.
And it's completely different for women. So that's why I focus on women, because we internalize this as well, because we are drip fed these messages. I mean, I used to buy all the anti-aging products. I still do occasionally. I thought, I'll give it a go, try, if I've got a particular age spot I don't like, I'll give it a go. But all that money, all that thing invested in trying to change a natural process, and a natural process which is happening from birth. But we have this idea that at midlife, that's when suddenly aging becomes a bad thing. It's like we get to this sort of cliff and then we're supposed to fall off it. Well, we don't fall off it. I believe that life is an upwards trajectory until the very end. If we take care of ourselves, if we look after our health, if we have good mental health, if we are socially active, all of these things are very important to how we age.
As I was listening, there was a question that was popping up in my head. The whole thing about the creams and the beauty products. I mean, you can take ages talking about an industry that's using that kind of vulnerability to sell you whatever product it may be. And I feel they're starting to tap maybe into the male market as well, playing on the same insecurity. So if anything, you've been doing this for how many years now, the Magnificent Midlife?
8 or 9 years. Yeah.
8 or 9 years. Would you say it's improving and the attitudes are shifting slightly maybe after COVID, or is it still pretty much the same limiting beliefs that we talked about in the beginning persisting?
That's very interesting. In some respects, it's changing, it's evolving. In some respects, that's a good change. And in other, it's not. It's really bad. Because, for example, in some cultures around the world, older people are respected. And it doesn't, you are allowed, older women are allowed traditionally to go grey. It was okay. They gained status as they aged. But what is happening is because of the marketing of all the products and services in the West, many of those cultures are taking on our ageist beliefs. So while we may be getting slightly better, other cultures are just taking on what we have been saying historically. And, women's status is decreasing instead of increasing. So it's really difficult and really complex. But gendered ageism, I think, is such a massive issue. And it's something that we have to tackle as a global society.
Yeah, and again, I'm somewhat interested in the differences across geographies that you observed, and you mentioned that there were people in the US pitching to be on the show who considered themselves to be in midlife in their 60s, 70s. So would you say the attitudes are perhaps somewhat different in the US, or would you say that some countries are doing better at changing those stereotypes than others?
Well, again, you see, that attitude shows the fact that they're considering themselves midlife then means they're fearful of aging. Therefore, they're not willing to say, I am a certain age. I'm still in midlife at 67. No, you're not, because you're not going to live to nearly 140. It's just not going to happen. So that is internalized ageism by not acknowledging that. I write about this in my book, actually. It's Anglo-Saxon societies especially that are particularly ageist. And it's the Protestantism, actually, because when you look at Europe as a whole, for example, and you look at Catholic countries or Orthodox countries, the ageism historically has not been as bad as in the Protestant Anglo-Saxon countries, UK, Australia, the US.
I know I have to read the book, and all our listeners should get the book, but I'm just curious why that is, because I grew up in one of those Orthodox cultures in Bulgaria. So I'm quite interested, to think about it now. Oh, I think you might have a point now that I think of it.
Oh, good. I'm glad I didn't get it wrong. So Protestantism, because there was the work ethic, right? So the value was in the work. Therefore, when you were older, you were presumed not to be working. Therefore, you lost value. And also, therefore, you had the added problem of being female in a very patriarchal society, a very patriarchal religion. So, for example, in Greece, part of my research, I looked at, older people are still very revered. They are respected. Whereas in the UK, you've only got to go into a card shop here in the UK, and it's all downhill from 25 or 30. What's the point in living past 30? Because it's all downhill from here. That's the message that we get. I want to celebrate every millisecond that I am alive. The older I get, the more powerful I believe my voice is. Which is why I do the podcast,
And
which
the more
is why I wrote the book.
have.
Yeah, the more experience I have. I do think I have some wisdom. But women, it's like they go through menopause and it's like, you can shut up now. Well, I'm not having that. I'm not having that at all.
We are not having that at all.
No.
Not on this show, not on any of the initiatives that I know you're involved in. I think that's really made me think, and because I've been thinking a bit about what happens from a career point in the earlier season of this show, and there was a thought that came to me when I was reading a book. I think it's Robert Poynton, about do pause, you're not a to-do list, and there he was talking about the need to pause, and he mentioned how in present day society, and probably there's a point to be said about the Anglo-Saxon world specifically, but I think it's getting global now at this day and age. People think they're productive and efficient if they're working like machines nonstop. The more you work, the more connected you are, the longer hours that you do, that's great. You're very productive. At least that's the narrative you're fed. And he's like, that obviously doesn't work. That only works with machines, which again, I think comes back to that Industrial Revolution, Protestant culture, and that expectation that you have to be pretty much like a machine working nonstop. And therefore, maybe women ending at a little bit of a disadvantage because of these precise perceptions.
Women are at a huge disadvantage with that work model because we are cyclical. And that is actually why I believe menopause is actually very powerful, because I'm no longer cyclical. I think I still have elements of cyclicality in my life because I had all that period of being cyclical. But it's another stage in my life. But women are cyclical. They have monthly cycles, usually up until around the age of 51. And that always having to be on model, that pushing model doesn't work for women, because we are cyclical beings. We do still take the majority of the caring responsibilities. Whether or not we have to, we do. That's what we've kind of programmed to do with all the estrogen flowing around. I call it the biddable hormone. It's designed to make us nurture everybody else instead of ourselves. Yeah. But that work model doesn't work. And that's why so many women now in Western, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant culture are struggling when they get to menopause because they're often in burnout. They've been going. They've been told that they can now have it all. So, they can have the children, they can have the marriage, they can stay at home or they can work, they can have it all. Well, I believe we can have it all, but not necessarily all at the same time.
Yes, I think I heard Michelle Obama say something similar, and I think that's an important message that women need to hear more. How do you interpret that, and what does that mean, and what can we learn from that, or how can we use that thought or life philosophy in our lives?
I do think we need to change the way that work works for women, because it doesn't work for women. It doesn't work for older women. It doesn't work for younger women. We have set up our workplaces for men. They are designed for men. Even the temperature in an office is designed for a man. It's not designed for a woman, whether she's premenopause or postmenopause or in menopause and having hot flushes. It doesn't work for her because women have, I think, always been seen as sort of the addition. The default is the man. And we need to get away from that. We need to have a default that works for both. But that crosses everything. That crosses medical research, which until very recently, predominantly it's on men. And it won't have considered the cyclicality, the changing hormones of a woman's body. So there are so many issues that we need to pick apart and sort out.
I think you were saying something very important about not just medical research, but also how the way the current work office, let's say, taking a traditional office as an example, is set up and it doesn't work for women. And I recently heard something again about the way school hours in the UK in particular are set in a way that why does school have to finish at 3? Because the expectation is that the woman sitting at home doing nothing all day and can run around and pick up children whenever is convenient. And that kind of 9 to 5 doesn't really fit within that, or whatever it may be. So yeah, it's something that I sometimes think about as well. And your point that it's not just about midlife, it's about any stage of your career or life as a woman in an office.
I mean, just think about how toilets are in offices. The toilets are not set up for women. I'm sorry, I'm lowering the tone slightly, but this is the point. My point is that it's set up for men. And how many women have had to try and surreptitiously, do they take their bag with them to the toilet because they've got their sanitary products in there? They want to hide them. How many of us have tried to hide that we're on our period in the office because we don't want anybody to know? Obviously we don't want anybody to know, but there is that level of hiding, that level of shame that women have to take with them into an office environment that men don't have to. So we need to make sure that women have the facilities that they need in an office scenario, and that extends to schools.
Yeah, no, it's a good example about some of the shaming and the fact that the system just isn't built for women, which I think is the what you've been fighting against, not just with your book, but also with spreading the message and the podcast that you do. So what are the, obviously there is a deeper motivation for you to do that. And I think part of it sounds like it's just getting your voice heard and reversing some of these, I'd say, untruths that are out there about what it feels like to be in middle age. But if you could sum it up, what's the ultimate goal with the project that you've started, which is very important?
I want to change the world. It's as simple as that. I genuinely want to change the world. I want to make life better for women at all ages. So on the menopause front, I want women in menopause to not feel any shame. I want them to have the resources so they know what's happening to their bodies. I want younger women, to not be frightened. There is such a narrative around now about fearing menopause. And it doesn't need to be feared. It's not something to be feared. It's puberty in reverse. That's all it is, and it may be difficult. But if it's difficult, I want us to ask, why is it difficult? It's probably because we're living such stressful lives, because we're now trying to be everything, as we talked about, and do everything and have it all at the same time. And our bodies can't do that. Our bodies are not designed to do that. We need to pause for menopause. The clue is in the word itself.
Yes.
And it's pausing because we need to do the work. We need to take the time to work out what's going on with our bodies. But I also want, younger women to be prepared, not scared. And I want older women, postmenopausal women, to be celebrated so that women of all ages know that life is going upwards. This is not, I don't suddenly get to this cliff at menopause and fall off it. I want the world to wake up and realize the power of older women, of women, all women, but especially the power of older women and how important they are, so that they're not losing women from the workplace because women don't want to work in a men's world anymore. That's what I did. I left work. I left the workplace at 40 because I just didn't want to work in that way anymore. I had given up so many years of my child's life. I had an au pair, then I had somebody picking him up from school and taking him to after school care, and then bringing him home from after school care. And I didn't want to work like that anymore. And sadly, as soon as I gave up work and could take him to school, he didn't want me to take him to school anymore. But I lost all of that time. I didn't have that time because I was trying to work.
What's a more sustainable way then? And what can we do without necessarily having to give up career or start something on our own to actually help?
Flexibility. We need flexible workplaces. I think COVID has changed it a lot because we can at least now work from home, which I think is brilliant. But there is still a stigma attached towards working from home. There is still a, mummy's on the slow track kind of narrative. And this shouldn't be like that. It really shouldn't be like that because, whatever responsibility we have outside of the office, whether that's caring for our children or caring for older relatives, as we get later in life, those are important roles within society and they need to be valued as such. So women and everybody, because there are also male carers, we all need to have flexibility. We all need to have the chance to perform at work, but also have a meaningful life in whatever shape that may look like.
Yeah, and that's not just for those who have children. It is something that, as you say and you advocate, it should be available to everyone, regardless of, how they identify in terms of gender or whatever else it may be, their personal family circumstances. We're not saying that only moms need flexibility. It's
Absolutely.
everyone.
Absolutely.
But then I also really wanted to talk a little bit about that scaremongering that you mentioned, because I know my listeners, I'm also one of those women who've heard a lot of things about menopause without necessarily having gone through that yet. And I 100% agree that what I've heard so far is it's going to be really bad. It's going to be really scary. It's going to be terrible. You may have to not be able to work. You may not be able to enjoy life and all those things. And then I think about my mum and my grandmother. And again, they grew up in Bulgaria, which is a different culture and society, not Protestant Christian, as we just talked about. And I don't think they even thought about it as a thing or as an issue. I mean, yeah, maybe there were some practical things around it and the life change, but I just feel like it was such a non-issue that I don't even remember them talking much about it while they were going through that.
It's very, very interesting. I can talk for hours on this, but I'll show you a little example. So there's a very good book by Susan P. Matten, who's a historian, and she wrote a book called The Slow Moon Climbs. And it's all about the history of menopause, the evolution of menopause, and why actually menopause is part of the evolution of the human species. It's why we're so successful, because we have grandmothers who are not competing with younger women to produce babies and go after the men. It's a natural evolutionary stage. But she describes in her book a study that was done amongst Mayan women in Mexico. And she talks about how the researcher was from Ethiopia. So the researcher was coming from a very different background in terms of perceptions of menopause. And she didn't go in and say, which of these 34 or 100 now sometimes symptoms did you experience? She went in and she asked these women, she said, when your period stopped, when you stopped bleeding, did you notice anything else? And they said, well, we stopped getting pregnant.
Oh,
and
that goes without saying.
That was it. That was it. There was nothing else that they specifically said had happened to them around that. So
they probably didn't work in an office, did they?
Exactly. I believe that we are the first cohort now going through menopause in such a stressful environment. You've got work, you've got the diet that we have. The British population is the fattest in Europe. And we know that weight has a big impact on menopause and symptoms that you may experience.
Hormones.
Yes. So, and it's the elephant in the room. Nobody wants to talk about weight. We also are a massively big drinking culture. You know, alcohol is fundamental to our existence here in the UK.
Socially, you're encouraged, and that's how people socialize.
Exactly. We use it to celebrate, we use it to commiserate, we use it as stress relief. And it's not stress relief because it just compounds the issues. And we fight menopause. Now, if you fight puberty or you fight pregnancy and childbirth and you fight menopause, you're probably going to have a more difficult experience of it, both physically and emotionally. And this is why it's so important that we get away from scaring women, because fear does not feed into health. You know, we're looking at situations of self-fulfilling prophecies. If you are petrified about something, then guess what? It's not going to be very easy. Whereas if you go, oh, okay, so this is puberty in reverse. So, you know, I'm evolving into another fantastic, magnificent stage of my life, as opposed to turning into a dried up old prune, which is what I originally thought when it happened to me, then we have a completely different perspective. I also want to say there are things that we need to be doing, and I see menopause symptoms as the canary in the coal mine. It's like the body's early warning system. We are so lucky as women to have it, I believe, because it gives us a chance to think, okay, what am I doing wrong? So if you're having lots of hot flushes, are you drinking too much alcohol? Are you having too much caffeine? If you're having palpitations, you know, our bodies are telling us that that's not actually very good for us. Or how much sugar are we having? We love our chocolate and sugar here in the UK. There are so many things. What I want women to do is, if they're struggling in menopause, to think about why is that happening? But also to think, you know, this is a tunnel, not a cave. It's a process. We go through it. If you struggled in puberty or you struggled in pregnancy, if you've been pregnant, you know, it's just another phase of life. It's something we need to go through. And I can tell you, you know, life on the other side is pretty damn amazing. The fact that people are talking about menopause as a deficiency, a hormone deficiency, it is not a hormone deficiency. We are designed from an evolutionary perspective to go through menopause. And it is not the fast track to ill health, which is the way it's being promoted. And why is it being promoted in that way?
Oh, I think we can take a guess.
To sell products
marketing
and
behind
services.
it, isn't
exactly. It's the same marketing that tells us we can't have the odd wrinkle or grey hair.
Well, honestly, I know it does, and I can tell, and that's why I really wanted to have you on the show, because I know you genuinely care about this. And I think, honestly, just speaking with you now for half an hour, I'm already feeling a lot better about what's about to come.
Good.
And it's true. And I'm actually going to tell my friends to listen to that episode, because I think that's very important. And that's just not, you know, it's a topic or a theme that comes up every time I have a guest. Maybe we're not talking about midlife and women specifically, but there is, I suppose, that sort of same message of listening to your bodies a bit more, and just rather than externalizing the problem and blaming it on this and that, just finding out, oh, what can I do? We all know that's connected. You're not getting good sleep. You're not getting good food. I mean, how do you expect your hormones to be in balance? And I think that's why those stories that you talk about are so important, whether it's about menopause or just any other stage of your life as a woman. We know hormones are vital. I think so many of us forget about this. I hope that, you know, maybe by reading your book or going and listening to your podcast, they'll get a little bit of a reminder that there are things you can do, and it's not a hopeless situation where you just have to, as you say, give up and wait for the inevitable to come, so to speak.
I think it's so important that we change the narrative. It really is important. And just to be, I always say, be curious. Be curious about who is telling you what and why are they telling you that, and what do they stand to gain by telling you that, by you believing something. And if you do feel yourself believing something, then question that as well. Say, why do I believe that? Does it really help me? Does it empower me? And if it doesn't, well, you can say, well, I'm not going to think that anymore. I'm going to find a different role model. I'm going to find a different narrative that works much better for me and that will empower me going forward.
Yeah, and it's again back to your point about you can't really change what's going on. It is a natural process. So the sooner you stop fighting it and embrace it and change your attitude so that you're not pushing against something, it's a bit like swimming against the current, isn't it?
Exactly. It is pointless.
You're just making your life harder. You might as well swim with the current and just, as you said, change your attitude towards it. And I think that's just so true. I speak to coaches a lot, or everyone who comes on the podcast. I'm hoping that we're spreading this message that instead of fighting for things, you should be enjoying things. So it sounds like, yeah, instead of fighting menopause, you should be enjoying it.
Well, a lot of women will hear that and say, well, there's nothing enjoyable about menopause. It's really difficult. And it can be difficult. I understand that. It can be difficult. It wasn't an easy experience for me. But there are positives to look forward to. It is, I think, a chance to get our health in much better shape, whether that be emotional health or physical health. You know, unresolved trauma can really come up in menopause as well. And if you're carrying that, you see a lot of women, they may have pushed that away or pushed it under the carpet. They haven't dealt with it. Menopause is actually a time when you do have to do that pausing and you have to do the work because you need to process what's happening to you and maybe grieve. You know, for me, it was a massive grieving process because my fertility was gone and it was gone a lot earlier than I'd hoped for. Now I'm just like, well, you know, the book was my baby. So, you know, there's lots of things that come out of it. And I love being postmenopause. Absolutely love it.
So you mentioned the book at the end. So obviously Magnificent Life is not just the book, there is the podcast, and you'll separately have a website. And as far as I know, you're also quite open to being booked for talks, presentations, so that if everyone wanted to connect with you, what's the best way?
Absolutely. Yeah. Over at magnificentmidlife.com. I'm on Magnificent Midlife on all the socials as well.
Yes, well, I know, and you are very active. Not on TikTok anymore, as you said, because I'm not sure the midlifers are necessarily on TikTok.
Oh, they are.
Are they?
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
Well, again, another what's called a stereotype that was in my head that was not correct. That it's all about Gen Zs. Yeah.
No.
But if people could learn anything from your experience fighting for or campaigning for a better knowledge around midlife, what would you want that to be?
Belief in yourself. Self-belief. It's so, so important. And imposter syndrome is at its strongest around midlife and menopause. And that's because we've been taught to believe it's all bad and that we no longer have any value to society. But if you believe in yourself and you look to yourself and you think, okay, I have this to offer and I have this message and I feel more confident now and I'm able to put myself first, then, believe that you are both worthy of that and capable of that.
Don't believe everything that you're told by marketing companies. I guess that's the message from Rachel. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. This has been really enjoyable. And I am about to go and get a copy of the book myself.
There was something missing in the first season of the show. I really wanted to include now in the second season more experienced women who've not only experienced that mid-career point, but actually women who've experienced midlife. And so many things change. And it was so helpful to get Rachel's perspective. Just a little reminder that not all of it has to be bad. And I think we live in a world where there's so much scaremongering about anything, some of it with very commercial purposes, of course. And men are not immune to that either, but I think as women, there's just been so much negativity around aging that has been aimed at us for decades and decades. Sometimes we just need a little reminder, and I'm so grateful to Rachel for giving us that little bit of hope that, look, this is completely natural, this is hormones at work, this is how it should be. And for me, it was really those reminders and those references to other cultures that was very interesting. So I wanted to ask you that, and please feel free to share with me on social media what you think. But maybe if you could think to where you were raised, where you grew up, try and compare and see if the perceptions of old age there were different. I think there's a lot to be said about this, and I can't wait to read Rachel's book. But it really made me think about what we've been told and what we've been sold for so many years, that old perception of work harder, push harder, try and increase your productivity. And if for some reason you're not productive anymore, just discard that person, that machine, whatever it is. That has been pretty much the concept that we've been sold in the corporate culture for many, many years. And I'm really glad to see that this is changing. So I wanted to encourage all of you who are perhaps still part of that corporate world to think about that next time when you're interviewing someone who is perhaps in middle age, be they man or woman, because ageism is very, very real, and see how you can support people who are looking to make changes in their careers in midlife. And finally, I wanted to go back to the little glimpse of hope that Rachel gave us, because I think that the only reason why menopause became so scary was because we lost touch with our bodies. We somehow stopped listening to what our bodies were trying to tell us, and we never questioned who is trying to sell us what and why when it comes to modern medicine. So I think really, if I'm going to leave you with one thought, it's going to be to always listen intuitively to what your body's trying to tell you, and you may be surprised. And in case you were skeptical that midlife can really be the best part of your life, then you need to listen to my next guest, growth and delivery expert Christine Sandman-Stone. After over 30 years in various corporate leadership positions, she set up her own advisory business, Deliver at Scale, and experienced a true renaissance in her 50s. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Sound of Breaking Glass. I truly appreciate you being here with me. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss on any new episodes. They drop every 2 weeks. I'd also love for you to join me over on Instagram or LinkedIn, where I share more behind-the-scenes moments, guest insights, and extra resources just for our amazing Breakers community. Let's keep the conversation going, and I can't wait to connect with you there. Until next time, take care and keep breaking through.